Well, hello there, you scrublords, and welcome to another episode of Devblog Chats. This is your host, Many Miles Away, and today we're going to be discussing the brand new Tier 4 heavy tank coming to the American tech tree, the T34. And this is a vehicle that has sparked much debate among the War Thunder community. Some people are saying that it's going to be awful, some people are saying that this is going to be the best thing that ever happened since cut bread, and some people haven't the faintest idea of what this vehicle is. So, let's talk about it. So if this vehicle reminds you of anything, it reminds you of a T29, just with a slightly different gun, and that's a very, very simple way of discussing it. The T34 is derived from the T29, however, it came through a development process starting with the T29. So the T29 was an attempt by the US to essentially fit a bigger gun onto a heavier chassis, and so the T29 was quite satisfactory, and it led to the development of the T30, which came right after it. And the T30 made a huge jump from a 105mm gun to a sort of cut-down long tom with a 155mm gun. And I think that gun was known as the T7. I could be wrong about that, but in any case. However, the US Army, they wanted something more powerful than the T29, but they wanted something that didn't require the crews to lug around 95-pound shells inside of the T30. Even with two loaders, 155mm shells are a massive, massive projectile, and it's super heavy, and your rate of fire isn't very satisfactory. Also, with the same engine and I think horsepower as the T29, the T30 took on a lot of weight and didn't really gain a lot in return. So, the US military, in February of 1945, decided to reject the T-30 and the 155mm gun tank. At the same time, they put us in a suggestion to Ordnance to adapt a 120mm M1 anti-aircraft gun as a tank cannon. And this led to the direct development of the T-34, as we see it in-game. Now, the T-34 was armed with the T-53 120mm gun, which is basically a M1 anti-aircraft gun with a muzzle brake added and a fume extractor added to the end of the barrel. And what this allowed them to do was fit a substantially more powerful and lighter gun into the T-34 chassis. Now, with the T-34, there isn't much else in terms of its actual development. They tried out a couple of different guns, and they tried out a bunch of different ammunition types, and this is where the controversy of the T-34 comes in. The T-34 is going to be a main branch vehicle, meaning that it's not premium. This is going to be an actual Tier 4 vehicle. And the problem that a lot of people have is that they go to Wikipedia and go, oh, well, in the Devblog, they said that it's going to be a more powerful 120mm gun than the T-29's 105. But they go to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says, oh yeah, it only fired armor-piercing and high-velocity and HVAP, APCR. And I go, what? Are you kidding me? This is it? And a lot of people are really freaking out right now, because the T-34, you know, we already experienced this with the T-29, or not necessarily the T-29, but with the American 105mm guns on, say, the T-95. If they don't have any APHE, they're useless. Well, not necessarily. I mean, granted, the T-95 was a horrible tank before it had the APHE, and it took, I think, one of the researcher who found it, from one of my trusted sources, told me that the researcher who found the T-13 shell documents, it took him 2 years to find like those 3 or 4 documents that had the information on the T-13 APHE round. And something tells me that Gaijin were waiting for that sort of info to come in before they released the T-29. In any case, the T-13 round has made the T-29 probably one of the best heavy tanks at its tier. And now that Wikipedia says, oh god, there's only AP and APCR, a lot of people are going, oh, this tank's going to be completely garbage. Now, this video is set out to disprove that the T-32, or the T-34, fired nothing but AP and HVAP, and I have the documents to prove it. So, without further ado, let's talk about that. Actually, before I get started, I do want to qualify something for those people out there. It did fire AP and HVAP, and here is a good document for, well, to prove that. So what does this document say? So, to break this down for you guys, the top part of the document is 120mm gun T53. And the T53 is the gun that's on the T34. You see up there, heavy tank T34, mount T125. Maximum rate of fire, 5 rounds a minute, 2 loaders. Now, what that means is that this thing is going to have the exact same reload with an ace crew as the T29. So, let's look at the ammunition there. So, armor-piercing shot, armor-piercing ballistic capped. At 1,000 yards, the gun will penetrate 7.8 inches, 198 millimeters, of a homogeneous steel armor at 30 degrees obliquity. So, it's sloped at 30 degrees. And at 2,000 yards, it will penetrate 6.8 inches, 173 millimeters. So, this vehicle is more than capable of penetrating quite a bit of armor. High-velocity armor-piercing / APCR, 15 inches, 381 millimeters of armor at 30 degrees at 1,000 yards, and 12.5 inches, 318 millimeters at 2,000 yards. The APCR on this is going to be quite devastating if they model it correctly. Now let's look at 2,000 yards, now let's look at 60 degrees. 102 millimeters at 1,000, 91 millimeters at 2,000. Let's see, 112 millimeters with APCR at 1,000, 76 millimeters at 2,000. So you can see how the penetration dramatically drops off on this APCR round after 1,000 meters. So, and the gun below that, by the way, is the 120mm M58, which is the gun that was mounted on the M103. And you can see the comparison differences between the two guns. So AP M358 shot, which is armor-piercing ballistic cap tracer, 221 millimeters at 30 degrees at 1,000 yards, and 196 millimeters at 2,000 yards. With the heat shells, it has 330 millimeters of penetration at 1,000 yards, and the same thing at 2,000 yards since it's heat. So, why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this to validate Wikipedia saying that that the T53 fired AP and HVAP. Now, let me show you all the ammunition it really could fire. So this document was provided by a tank historian by the name of Ken Estes. And Ken Estes sent this to my trusted source, who passed it on to me. And Ken Estes has written a series of fantastic books on American heavy tank development. And they've also, I'm actually reading one of his books right now, which is M103, 1950 to 1974, and he mentions in his book the development of 2 different 120mm guns for the M103. There was the T122 and the T123. The T123E1, which is what would ultimately be adopted. So, the other details of this document basically talk about the development of 155mm HESH, 155mm heat, but what they also refer to is the fact that the T122 is essentially a rebuilt version, a lighter rebuilt version of the T53. And the T122 was capable of firing all of the T53's ammunition and more. So the T122 fires HVAP. I'm not sure what the actual second round is. Shot something 120mm. That's the T18. Shot HVAP DS, which is armor-piercing discarding sabot, which on the T122 is called the T98. It fires shot tracer practice, which is T21. Shot HVAP DS 120mm, which is another one. It's called the T105. Charge propelling HVAP, so that's the propellant charges. And then it's got armor-piercing capped 120mm, which is, I believe, T16E1. Armor-piercing 120mm, T116, and then the propellant charges for both of those. So, not only does it fire HVAP, but it fires armor-piercing discarding sabot, and it also fires armor-piercing capped and armor-piercing. Now, you'll also notice on the right-hand side there that it's got 120mm guns T123, and these are essentially the same shells, just renamed so that way they could differentiate them from the T123. It should be mentioned that in the document above, it talks about developing 120mm high explosive plastic, which is 120mm HESH for this gun, and they did test it, and let me show you another document where that is listed. So, you can see here, armor-piercing, high-explosive anti-tank, HVAP-DS, and HEP. And HEP is just the American name for high-explosive squash head. So, and let me show you the penetration values. Now, remember the orientation of these. Armor-piercing, high-explosive anti-tank, HVAP-DS, APDS, and HEP. So, let's move down here. So, and now, unfortunately, the actual distances are not totally listed here, but I am told that for the armor-piercing, the top row, 9.8, I'll have it listed there, and have it boxed in for you, 9.8 inches is 1,000 yards. So, if we scroll down here and look at all of the different penetration values for 1,000 yards, you can get an idea of how powerful some of these shells are. So we have armor-piercing, 9.8 inches, high-explosive anti-tank, 15 inches, we have HVAP-DS, which has 17.5 inches, armor-piercing discarding sapo, 17.5 inches of RHA, and then HESH is 6 inches all across the board. Now, 6 inches, I know right off the top of my head, is 152 millimeters, so, or 150 millimeters, so this is going to be very, very much similar to all of the other HESH rounds that we have in the game, much like the Chieftain, much like the 105s, so that's not surprising. What is devastating that I've noticed is the 19.5 inches. I believe that is at 1,000 yards? Maybe that's at 1,000 yards against non-sloped armor. Look at the 19.5 inches of penetration with the HVAP-DS over there on the left. I've calculated that right now. That comes out to about 491 millimeters of penetration. Holy shit nugget. So if we were to get APDS for the T34, this would have the highest penetration of any of the 120mm guns in the game. Actually, any tank gun in the game. It would have literally more penetration than heat. Yeah. So if this doesn't, like, destroy the myth that we're only going to get armor-piercing, I don't know what does. I mean, and frankly, if Gaijin introduces the vehicle with only armor-piercing after these sorts of statistics are there and available for them to look at, I'm going to be furious. And I imagine that a lot of you will be as well. So, without further ado, I hope you guys have enjoyed this Devblog chats. I realize this has been very, very technical, but at the same time, I think it's important that we realize that what Wikipedia says isn't always right. And doing some further investigation on these subjects really, really pays off dividends in the long run. In any case, this has been Many Miles Away. Keep your tracks checked, keep your binos in place, keep around on the tube, and I will see you guys in the next one.